guys, and welcome back to my channel. So today I want to talk about all of the books that I read in October. So in total I read 24 books, so I'm going to try to keep this as brief to each book as I possibly can. If you want more in-depth thoughts, I probably talk about all of these books in my reading vlogs for the month, so you can check those out if you want, but I will try to be quick. And I'm going to do them from worst to best of the month. So my first and only 1-star book of the month was Fangirl by Rainbow Rowell. There was a lot about this that I didn't like. There were a lot of weird comments about race, jokes made about gay couples. I feel like if I had read it maybe when I was in high school, I would have related more to the characters so they wouldn't have seemed as unlikable, and they were just very one-dimensional, and the whole like fandom aspect in her writing fan fiction kind of didn't really stick with me as much as I feel like it would have when I was in high school. So I definitely think this is, one, poorly written, and two, not necessarily for me at this point in my life. So let's go on to my 2 stars. So the first one I want to talk about is the Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires. So this is a massively popular book right now, basically about this small town. Women start this book club, and it's set in like the 80s, and it's basically a bunch of house moms, and they read true crime books together, and then kids start going missing and like weird stuff starts happening in their town, and so the main character wants to investigate. It wasn't good. It was poorly plotted. The horror aspects really were the only things that redeemed it, but the characters were all carbon copies of one another, and like the actual villain of the story, the vampire, was just really boring, and altogether it was not great. I think that Grady Hendrix was trying to make commentary into topics that he knows nothing about, which is women's rights and issues that people of color deal with, and he's neither of those things, and so it really just felt not great. And he was trying to make this commentary about women being their own people, and you know how they were treated as like just silly housewives who were hysterical, but he wrote all of his female characters to be carbon copies of each other. None of them were particularly memorable or different, and it just didn't come off well. And in addition to that, there's a huge trigger warning in this for sexual assault, and specifically on minors. And there was an implication made at the end, not even an implication, it was just flat out said that the rape essentially was pleasurable for the victim, which, given the fact that 90% of his victims are children, gross. Wicked Saints. It's a dual POV story, 2 teenagers from opposing kingdoms. One is like a cleric, which is like a mage, and she is being hunted by the other one. The other one is the prince of the opposing kingdom that is trying to hunt her down, and she's just powerful, and they want to exterminate her basically. And then she teams up with a group of another mage who is from the enemy kingdom and some just random refugees to fight back and infiltrate the enemy kingdom. This was not written poorly in like sentence structure and all of that. It was written poorly in that the magic system was not well developed. The world was really hard to understand, and you couldn't quite pinpoint anything about the story, like the world or the kingdoms or the wars or really anything, or the motivations of the characters, because everything was so flat and the characters were really flat. I think the ending kind of makes me want to read the second book, because I think it's going to be about like the only character that was actually interesting and actually well written. So I'm not against reading the second one, but that one was just not well developed. I hope that the second one, which I believe is already out, kind of went through some beefing up, and when it got to the editors, they were like, listen, something needs to be like worked out, because you couldn't picture the world, which in fantasy is like 90% of it, and you couldn't like understand really the magic, so when things would start to go weird with the magic, it didn't make an impact in any way. The other issue that I had with it was that it's dual POV, like I said, and the point of view of the prince of the enemy kingdom felt completely irrelevant. You could have taken his point of view out of the story completely and it probably would have made it better. His chapters were just him getting drunk and him complaining about his dad and being fearful of his dad. But there wasn't really any need for him to have his own voice because he wasn't doing anything and he wasn't contributing anything. So I wasted my time reading his chapters is really what it came down to. My next 2-star read is We Were Liars. So this is basically about a family that owns their own island, and the kids of like the family of the adults are involved in a crime, and the main character can't remember the summer of the crime that had happened. And so she comes back to the town, or to the island, and she's trying to recall what happened, but no one really wants her to remember. And I think what this really just reinforced for me is that I don't care about rich white kids like complaining about their inheritance on their private islands in their mansions. None of it was appealing to me. I didn't enjoy any of it. I just didn't really care about any of the characters or the plot or the crime or anything. The twist was just, I just didn't care about any of it. And then my last 2-star of October was Aurora Burning, which is the second book in the Aurora Rising series. I liked the first one. I gave the first one, I believe, 4 stars. And it's about this group of like space pilots, and in the first one some stuff happens, they go off on their own, and there is a character that was from the past, and she was basically frozen, and then she was meant to be sent to this planet to basically rebuild and live on this planet. But she ends up waking up and she joins this crew. I didn't like the second one at all. It was essentially plotless. It was basically them blowing up one station, like space station, and then the girl Ari from the past fainting because she's OP but doesn't even bother to learn how to use her powers, and then going to another station, blowing that up, and then fainting again. Any character development that we got in the first one was just completely irrelevant, and the relationships were very bland, and everything felt very low stakes because, like I said, Ari is just OP and she just can do whatever she wants with no real consequences. And even when the kind of like teacher of the person that's teaching her how to use her powers is like, this is what you have to do, she's like, nah, I'm not gonna do that, but she still is able to use her powers. And it just felt very underdeveloped, and I did not enjoy it. So moving on to my 3 stars, the first 3-star I have for you is the Graveyard book, which is basically it's a novel, but each chapter in it is like, they're mini short stories, I guess, but they follow one central plot. And the central plot is that this boy, his family was murdered when he was a baby, and he escapes while this murder is happening. And he gets rescued by ghosts in a nearby graveyard, and he basically gets raised in this graveyard. And it's just following his life as he's getting older, but also the person that's trying to hunt him down. And each chapter is like different stories about the ghosts that are in this graveyard, and like learning about different magical creatures. It wasn't bad by any means. It got a really average rating. I'm not mad that I read it, but it wasn't anything like spectacular. And I don't think that my life is like any different having read it. It was just a nice little spooky read that was pretty well written, and I wouldn't mind picking up other things by Neil Gaiman. This was just not mind-blowing or revolutionary. Teach Me, which is a teacher romance, and the main character is plus size, and they are both over the age of 40, I want to say. And I think that's pretty common for Olivia Dade. She generally, I'm pretty sure she always has a plus size main character, and I think they're always like older adults, which you very rarely ever see in romance, but it's basically just a relationship, like them learning how to get over all the baggage that each person has and kind of coming together and figuring out how their relationship is going to work and stuff like that. It was just a really nice slice of life book that had believable conflicts, and all the characters reacted very believably, and they just felt like genuine, real people. So it was just a nice little 3-star slice of life deal. So next I want to talk about The Silent Patient. So if you were following my vlogs for this month, you know that I went on a little journey of exploration into the thriller genre to figure out, will I ever love a thriller? And this book did not solve that problem for me. This is essentially about a woman who murders her husband, and she gets put in a mental health facility for treatment, but once she never says a single word after she's killed him, and she's never talked. And you're following the point of view of the psychiatrist, I believe that's what he is, that is trying to get her to talk and figure out what happened and why she won't. You're also getting passages from her diary before she killed him. Nothing about this to me was particularly thrilling. Nothing was shocking. I didn't feel like the reveal at the end was entirely unguessable, and I just wasn't really blown away by it. I don't know if it was the writing style. The writing style is very direct and emotionless and kind of just very cut and dry, which I'm personally not saying that is a bad thing, but I don't know if that contributed to the kind of way that I just feel like it was very average or not, but I just didn't really feel like it was anything spectacular. And I wish the ending had been a little more, I just wanted something else. I don't know how it could have been better, but it just, something was missing. The next 3-star is Hate to Want You, which is a friends to lovers to enemies to lovers relationship between a Romeo and Juliet kind of thing, where their family was in business together, and then something happens and one of the families gets kind of written out of the business, and so there's a family feud, and the female in the relationship leaves the town, and then she comes back as an adult, and they kind of are trying to repair their previous relationship and repair their relationships with their families basically. And it was just average. I mean, Alyssa Rye's writing, she's a good writer, and I think that she can make believable characters and believable conflicts, and they feel like real people, but I just wasn't in love with either character. I didn't like them, I didn't dislike them, I just didn't really care about them, so their relationship was just kind of irrelevant to me. It was kind of just a take it or leave it kind of thing. My next 3-star read was To All the Boys I've Loved Before, which is a YA contemporary about a girl who writes letters in almost like a diary, but letters to her crushes, and one day the letters get sent out to all of the boys that she has written letters to. I didn't hate this, but it wasn't great for me. This is a really popular book, and it's been made into a movie and people love it. There's definitely a fan base for it, but for one, I'm not really a fluffy sort of person to begin with, and then add on top of that the kind of more juvenile writing of this, and it just wasn't a recipe for a delicious book for me. It wasn't sparking anything. It's not poorly written or anything, but it's written for a younger audience, and I just was not blown away by it. And obviously I'm not the demographic. This wasn't written for me. It was written for a younger audience, and I can recognize that. But I'm not mad that I read it, and I don't have anything bad to say about it, but it just wasn't that 4 or 5. And my last 3-star of the month was the Roanoke Girls. This one was gross. This is about a teenage girl whose mother dies, and she gets sent to live with her grandparents in the Roanoke house. And she spends the summer there, and then she ends up leaving in the middle of the night. and she comes back some years later because the cousin that she kind of spent that summer with goes missing, and so she wants to help find out what happened and just find her. And you slowly start realizing that there's more to the situation and more to why she left originally than meets the eye. There's some not great stuff going on in this. It's gross, and there's definitely some family secrets here. Again, it's not badly written. The story itself is entertaining. I read it in one day and I didn't have a bad time, but I just didn't feel like this one would be memorable, and there wasn't anything about it that was spectacular. None of the characters were someone that I would remember beyond that person. If you know, you know. And there's always a romance in thrillers, and I don't get it. I don't understand why. They are never well developed. It's like dipping your toe into something, and I guess it's meant to give the main character like a sense of hope or like a longevity to the life when you otherwise aren't quite sure if they have a long life ahead of them. But it always just feels so unnecessary to me. And the romance between her and a boyfriend of her past felt like a kind of a large part of this story. And the main character, she had a very flat affect the whole time. Everything just seemed to kind of be happening to her. She didn't really have any feelings about it. And the only thing that kind of she reacted to was the boyfriend, which there was a lot more messed up stuff going on than just the boyfriend. But it's not something that I'm gonna remember like 3 months from now. So those are all my 3 stars. Let's go on to my 4 stars. I had a pretty decent number of 4 stars, which it's definitely not a bad thing. That means that I was enjoying the majority of the things that I was reading. They just weren't like spectacular. So the first 4 star I want to talk about is Gilded Wolves. So this is the story of 6 people who are attempting to pull off a heist for a greater goal, of course. And in this world, there are several different houses, and the houses are different families. And so the houses are passed down through the family line, and there is a ring test that is performed to dictate who is destined to take over the house from their parent. And one of the main characters felt like he was cheated out of his house, and his house eventually ended up crumbling and no longer existed, in addition to another house. And so he wants to perform this heist with this group to kind of get his house back and get his legacy back. There's a lot like that's going on in the world, and with like the other characters, obviously they all have their own backstories. This gets compared a lot to 6 of Crows, which I guess if you're under the impression that Leigh Bardugo invented the idea of a heist, then I can see why you would think that that would be a similar thing. But it's not really. The characters aren't the same. They don't have the same feeling. The friend group doesn't have the same feeling. The friend group is definitely more endearing as a whole, whereas in 6 of Crows, they all have like this kind of grittiness to them. I feel like even though the characters in Gilded Wolves have, like, they're criminals, they're stealing stuff, they still each are more wholesome almost, and they all have their own separate motivations, and the world is completely different, and the what they're stealing is completely different, and just everything about it is different. Sure, it has the same premise of a heist and a group of people pulling off a heist, but that's not a new idea, and we've seen it time and time again. So if you didn't like 6 of Crows, I still would say give Gilded Wolves a shot. I definitely think it's a fun read, and obviously I gave it 4 stars, so I enjoyed it. It wasn't just like an average rating for me. That being said, I liked 6 of Crows. 6 of Crows felt more character driven to me. 6 of Crows was a decently plotted and built story, but you are reading 6 of Crows for the characters. You're not reading it for the plot. I mean, let's just all be honest here, because Leigh Bardugo is very good at writing characters. This was a more balanced story. This is a story where you care about the plot, and the central focus is the plot and performing this heist, but you also care about the characters. And I just think it was a very well-rounded story. So the next 4-star is Only for a Night, which is part of a series, and they're like basically novellas. And this one is about a guy who previously left the Irish mob, and he started a sex club. A girl from his past, which is basically like the one that got away, comes and says like, my husband just died. I need you to show me what I've been missing, basically. And that sparks. I think it's only like 160 pages, and it's well written. Obviously it got a 4-star, which is pretty uncommon for novellas for me. It's very well written. The relationship was believable, and I wasn't like unhappy with the happy ending, which it's a romance, that's not a spoiler. That's kind of what happens in romances. Good enough for me to want to pick up the rest of the series. My next 4-star read of the month was Station 11, which is a post-pandemic / pandemic story following a whole cast of characters. Basically, this pandemic wiped out, like, I think it's 90% of the population, and the rest of the population is basically just like fighting to survive. And that's the big bad. The big bad in the story, but the big bad is a cult that is basically going around and taking whatever they want. Supplies, women, like whatever they want, they take, and it's ruled by this guy called the Prophet. And it's a dual timeline story from the past where the pandemic happens, and then the present where obviously you're seeing all of your characters and where they are now. This was beautifully done, beautifully done. The way that Emily St. John Mandel like made all of the characters connect and all of the storylines connect was just absolutely brilliant. And each chapter was like a little piece of string, and then the next piece of string, until you had the whole sweater that she was trying to weave. And it was just fantastically done and very well written. I wish that we had explored a little bit more of like the cult aspect, because I really felt like that was the big bad that we were running from the whole time. And I didn't think that that was as developed or as closely followed as I would have liked. But I really have no complaints. The reason it didn't get a 5-star was because honestly, I could have put it down at any time and it wouldn't have made a difference to me. Through no fault of the author, like this is beautifully done, but it didn't like make me feel like I had to finish it. Children of Blood and Bone, which is a YA fantasy, basically about this world where the ruling kingdom has found a way to suppress and kill all of the magi in this world. You are following several points of view, but the two like predominant ones are Zelly, who is a magi who saw her mother killed, and she kind of has to like suppress. Once the government found a way to suppress the magic, like all of the magic went away, and Zelly is kind of having to hide in a poor village and kind of just get by. And then she has an encounter with the crowned princess of the kingdom, who has stolen an artifact that can allegedly bring back power to all of the people that lost it. So they have to go on a hunt with Zelly's brother, to figure out what they can do to bring magic back using this artifact. And then the other more predominant point of view is Anon, who is the crowned prince of the kingdom, who is hunting them down, but he's also like trying to bury his own magical powers that he is like slowly growing into. I think the world building was just exceptional. Plot wise, it's a pretty standard fantasy story, but the like folklore and the world building and the magic system were just so well done that it like skyrocketed this above your average fantasy. The complaint that I had was that Anon, who is a main character, is very weirdly developed. There is seemingly no character arc, and so his redemption arc is very unsatisfactory, and the romance that happens is very unsatisfactory. And it just felt like that was like a missing piece of the story. Like there was something lacking, and because he was so central to the plot and he was a main character, that kind of weird development and that all of that was just like, it made it miss the mark a little bit. So then I read The Year of the Witching, which is a YA, I think it's YA story of a biracial girl living in like a puritanical village, and she is a witch. She's believed to be a witch, and her mother was married to the prophet, which is the person that basically runs this town, this village, this puritanical system. And he has many wives, but she ends up trying to kill him, and she cheats on him, the mother does, and then leaves and goes into the dark wood, which in this world they believe in the father and that he is all knowing and he's, you know, the light. And then to counteract that, the mother is like the devil, basically. And she is evil, all of that. So her domain is the dark wood. And our main character feels like this strange calling to the dark wood, and she doesn't know why. And eventually she ends up obviously going into the dark wood. I really liked this. I don't know if this is a debut novel, but it's written really well. The world building was very strong, and you could you had an idea in your head about how everything worked, and just all of like the unrest and the oppression and just the hatred that's going on in the world, and you can feel it, and you kind of feel the same feelings that she's having, and you can just understand and see the world. The issue that I had was that I wish it had been a little bit grittier. So like a lot of it is meandering, and I wish we had gotten a little bit more maybe of rituals or of fighting back, or her developing her powers, her trying to understand what happened with her mom. But instead it was a lot of like weird sequences of events, and not weird in like a good way, just like weird random events. And I just wish it had tapped more into like the witch and the like fighting back and like using your powers and like more of the dark wood and all of that than it really did. My next 4-star that I want to talk about is A Monster Calls, which is a short story about a boy whose mother has cancer. And in the middle of the night, a tree monster visits him, and the tree monster says, "I'm going to tell you 3 stories, and when I'm done with my 3 stories, you're going to tell me your story." And you're basically following this young boy's life in school, where people are treating him different and acting as if he doesn't exist, but also his mom who is sick, and his dad who's not in the picture, and he just has a lot of rage and grief and all of these things. And you're seeing it play out through his interactions with the tree, and I did tear up. It's a very emotional story, and the illustrations were absolutely stunning. The way the story is told is beautiful and emotional, and it was so, so good. I am thirsty. I guess this is what happens when you have to talk about 24 books. A Bookish Life of Nina Hill, which is about Nina Hill, who would have thought, who is kind of an introvert. She works at a bookstore, she has her group of friends, she does quiz bowl, she has book clubs and things like that, but she's really just kind of okay with being by herself, her and her cat and her books in her house. But she discovers that her father, who she knew nothing about, has passed away, and he added her to his will. And his family wants to meet her, wants to know what the situation is, why she's never been in the family. Some of them want to bring her into the family. Some of them want to kind of just dispel her and say that she shouldn't be in the will and kind of move on with it. And in addition to that, she has a romance with a guy who is like part of another quiz bowl team that they are against. But I didn't really have a lot of expectations going in because it was something that I had vaguely heard of, but I wasn't really aware of like any opinions on it. And so I really had no expectations. And I really related a lot to Nina Hill. I think she's a very relatable character, and I think the majority of us can relate to her as a person. And it was just a very sweet, like, slice of life story about a girl opening herself up to love in multiple kinds of ways. And I really enjoyed it, and I really liked my reading experience. And then my last 4-star read of October was A Good Girl's Guide to Murder. So this is about a senior whose final project is to, is she a senior or junior? Some high school project is to write a paper, and in her paper specifically, she wants to write about a crime that happened in their town. And 5 years prior, this girl was murdered. They believed that it was her boyfriend, and before he could be arrested or anything like that, before the investigation really got underway, he goes out into the woods and he kills himself. So people are basically like, that's all the evidence we need. He killed her, like, that's it. She doesn't believe that that's really what happens, and she wants to investigate more and figure out what really happened. So she enlists the help of the teenage boy, his brother, to kind of help her figure out what's going on. And so she goes to all of the like likely suspects and the people in this girl's life that could have played a hand into what happened or just had more information. I loved this. I liked this a whole lot, and I don't know what specifically I liked about this. I don't like detective stories. I don't really think they're all that interesting. She's not a detective. She's like a regular person that like takes sleuthing into their own hands, I guess. And it just did something for me. The ending wasn't like unguessable, and I wasn't shocked or anything like that. And like that wasn't, I guess that because that wasn't like an expectation, I didn't expect it to shock me. I enjoyed it a whole lot. I think our main character was fun to kind of follow around, and the like twists and turns and connections were interesting, and like figuring out how everything connected. And it was just very, very well done. And I really enjoyed myself. So there's something about this kind of thriller, like this mystery, that does it for me, that I really enjoyed. So hopefully I can find something like this that can kind of spark the same enjoyment from me. And that is all the 5 stars, or the 4 stars. And then I had 1 5-star for the month, and that was Rebecca. I listened to the audiobook of this, and it was immaculate. It's essentially about an unnamed narrator who we get the sense is very young. She meets this widower who owns an estate called Manderley. And Manderley is famous, and he is very wealthy, and it's said to be like an amazing, awesome estate that is just well kept and all of that. And she is kind of aware that he's a widower and that he had a wife called Rebecca who died, and that he appears to be very upset about her passing. And they spark a relationship, and she eventually obviously moves to Manderley, and some weird stuff starts going on. What is so fantastic about this is that you don't know what's going on. You can't figure it out, and your narrator is so uncomfortable in literally every single situation that she's in. She's so unsure of herself. She's so unsure of her relationship with Maxim, who is her spouse, and her relationships with the staff, and she's unsure of her place, and she feels like Rebecca is following her everywhere she goes, and the staff prefers Rebecca. She feels like Maxim prefers Rebecca, and Rebecca is just everywhere in everything, and she can't get away from it. And so this weird stuff starts going on, and it feels like your narrator is sort of losing her sense of self and her sense of reality, and you're not sure if it's because the staff is doing something to her, if Maxim is doing something to her, if the ex-wife really isn't dead. Like, you have no idea what's really going on. and it's just so well done. The suspense is impeccable. Like, the story is just impeccably done and just perfection. So then the last 3 books that I read this month, I didn't rate. So I read and didn't rate The Dutch House. Really, you're just following one person from childhood to adulthood, and he lived in a house called the Dutch House. Their mom leaves, him and his sister, she leaves them, and his dad gets remarried. And his dad is very domineering and very cold, and the stepmom doesn't really seem to like them all that much. And eventually the dad passes away, and then their lives progress from there. I don't know what this book was trying to accomplish. The plot is very all over the place. It was like mincing of life experiences together, but I don't know why we were reading about the life experiences. I don't even know if I liked the book. I don't know what the point of the book was. I don't know what I learned from the book, if I needed to learn anything from the book. So then I read The Sword of Summer, which is the first book in the Magnus Chase and the Gods of Asgard series, and I didn't rate it because I read like a vast majority, I would say about 80%, which to me is read, and I struggled through it for about 5 days. It's about a kid named Magnus Chase who is the son of a Norse god. He performs a heroic act, he dies, and he ends up getting into Valhalla. And from there, he's kind of sent on a quest. I recognize that this is not for me. This is not for my age demographic. I recognize that a lot of people like Rick Riordan's writing style. They like him as a person. They like his stories. I recognize that. It is just not me. I'm not one of those people, and I'm not going to rate this knowing it's not my age demographic, and it's just not for me. So it's unfair of me to rate something that it's not for me. And then the last book that I read but didn't rate was One of Us is Lying. So this is the story of a group of like kids that are put in detention, and then in detention, one of the people in there with them ends up dying, and so they are like thrown into an investigation because they find out that he actually was poisoned with peanuts, which he's allergic to, and so they do a bunch of investigation into like what happened. It was good up to about page 260. And then for some reason my library copy became an entirely different book. I don't know why. I looked it up. I tried to find out if that was like a thing. I couldn't find anything. And then once you like went past like the 30 pages that were an entirely different book, it was at a completely different point in the story, and so I had missed a whole bunch by the time I even got, or if I had just skipped over those 30 pages, I would have missed a bunch. So I couldn't finish it. I did look up the ending, and I wouldn't have been disappointed because I didn't really have any expectations for it, but it wasn't like spectacular. I DNF'd a lot. So it kind of shocked me when I went to go make this list of how many books that I had read, because I felt like I didn't read anything this month. Make sure you comment down below the books that you read this month. I know a lot of people were like reading spooky books, and I would love to hear about what you guys read, or if you read any of the same books that I did, what your thoughts on them were. That's pretty much it for this. So I will see you guys in my next video. I hope you liked it, and thanks so much.